feature I'll run you guys through later, which basically means you bloat up the reasoning tokens, but then the actual token spill ends up being very low, and so on and so forth. So the number one recommendation that they have is to manage your context proactively by using /cost. This helps you check your current token usage. You can also configure a status line to display continuously. In order to configure a status line in Claude Code, you just go /status line. You'll notice that you can't currently do this inside of the GUI version. So what you have to do instead is you have to open Claude in a terminal here, because, graphical user interfaces don't have a status line. A status line is basically this little piece of text that occurs before. And then you just go /status line here. It'll ask you what you want to put in your status line. And so I'm basically just going to ask it to include a little like loading bar with the total number of tokens that I've used. Update my status line so it includes a little loading bar that is how many tokens that I've used out of my total context. So as you can see, it converted that into another mini prompt using a status line setup agent, and then it's going to do this kind of cool little status effect. So I'm actually going to get to see it down here. I'll show you guys what that looks like in a sec. Okay, and as we could see here, we now have that little bar. So 13% of my tokens are used up. That's kind of neat. We also see the current model. And then, the branch that we're on, if you're into programming with repositories and like Git workflows and stuff like that. This to me isn't like super valuable, to be honest, if I'm being frank. I just thought it was kind of cool. So just another reason why doing all of this in the terminal gives you significantly more latitude. You can't really just like add a status line to the GUI version, at least not now, but this one's very hackable. Another thing you can do is you can add custom compaction instructions. So you can actually say /compact and then give it a prompt telling it what to prioritize. You could do this every now and then, which is obviously quite valuable. You can use /clear to start fresh when switching to something that is unrelated. So what I mean by this is if I just delete this little terminal instance down here, just go /clear. What it'll do is it'll clear the entire conversation so you have no context anymore. So now there's no previous context. If I go back to /context, you can see that scrolling up to messages, we have 152 tokens, which is basically everything that we've done here so far. Aside from that, you can use instructions inside of the Claude.md to basically try and minimize the total number of tokens generated, as I mentioned. So you could say something like, hey, write as succinctly as possible. You can reason all that you want because that isn't added to the context. But when you actually give me something, just give me the bare bones information. If I need more, I'll actually ask you. Choosing the right model is really big. So if you're using a really simple sub-agent or something, we'll talk about how to develop those later on. I recommend using smaller models like Sonnet. These smaller models are typically less intelligent, but they have much larger context windows and then you build less. So that allows you to do all the heavy lifting inside of the sub-agent that's cheaper. And then they just return you those results, which is great. As you see here, the Anthropic team specifies to reduce the MCP server overhead. And that's because, as I mentioned to you guys, some MCP servers just suck. They just have a bajillion tools. You'll download one and 20% of your token usage will be gone immediately. That's obviously quite costly, and then it makes Claude much dumber. So, there are ways to reduce MCP server overhead. They have what's called advanced and automatic tool search now. When MCP tool descriptions exceed 10% of your context window, they won't actually load all of them. They'll just try and search for them before. So meaning you'll say, hey, can you open up a new page in Chrome DevTools or something? It won't actually have access to all that immediately. What it'll do is it'll search first a list of tools using grep or something like that, which is its own built-in search tool. And then it'll find one that says open Chrome DevTools, and then it'll load it. That helps you avoid, massive MCP server overheads and then obviously wasting a lot of tokens. Some other tips are to move instructions from Claude.md to skills. So remember how earlier I said your Claude.md should be like 200 to like 400 or 500 tokens lines maximum. Some people make it even longer, but you shouldn't. Instead, what you can do is you can break those down into specific rules. And then any rules that are more tasks than rules, you can actually just turn into skills. So skills will load on demand, meaning that only when you specifically invoke them will they be added to your context, which is quite helpful. You can also adjust extended thinking. We haven't chatted too much about extended thinking, but if you go back to Claude here, if you go to /model, you have the ability to switch which model you're using. And then additionally, if you go over here, there's also a thinking tab, which allows you to turn on and off that little reasoning or thinking window. As mentioned, thinking is pretty valuable because it avoids you wasting tons of tokens in the conversation chain itself. It offloads it to a little thinking tab. And what you can do is you can actually modify the effort level using /model. You can disable thinking completely, or you can turn the number of tokens that you give it to like maximum think from, 8,000 to like 32,000 or more. Now, agent teams is another feature of Claude Code, which I'm looking forward to covering with you guys, but currently it costs a lot, about 7 times more tokens than standard sessions, especially when teammates run in plan mode, because every teammate maintains its own context window. So they actually kind of recommend against it if minimizing token usage is the number one thing that you want to do. And then finally, writing specific prompts is probably the highest ROI tip that I could give you here. Instead of improve this code base, you saying something specific, hey, fix this one feature that I found in this file, is a lot more precise. And as a result, despite the fact that it takes a little bit more thinking on your end, a little bit more of your extended thinking, Claude's token usage ends up being significantly decreased. Finally, even Anthropic says that planning for complex tasks is the way to go because this significantly reduces the total number of tokens you use when you're actually building solutions. Usually API calls and calling servers and requesting web pages and stuff, these load a ton of tokens into context. So avoiding doing research entirely is pretty valuable. Once you're at the building stage, just front load the research with plan and worry about it later. Now it's time to chat skills, which in my opinion is probably one of the most economically valuable ways that you can use Claude Code. This is a Claude Code in aggregate tutorial, obviously, so I don't just want to talk about skills. If you guys want to know more about how I personally use skills and things like skills, I do also have another course that talks all about what I call agentic workflows, which are analogous to skills. But for now, anybody that's not acquainted with this, I just want to run a quick demo. So if we open up this .claude folder in the top left-hand side, you can see that we also have a nested skills folder. And I have a bunch of different skills here. I have skills that allow me to classify leads, create proposals automatically, not dissimilar to the proposal generator app that we did before, find outliers in my niche, update and auto reply to emails, edit my YouTube videos for me, onboard new clients to my agency, apply to Upwork jobs, and so on and so forth, monitor and then classify my school posts. I mean, if you think about it, what this is this is a collection of all the things that I usually do in a daily basis, like for my own intellectually valuable knowledge work, the stuff that I basically get paid for. And then what I've done is I've just turned them into checklists, and then I've just given these checklists over to Claude. So let's pretend that I want to do one of these tasks today. In my case, I want to scrape some leads. So what I've done is I've created a skill up here called Scrape Leads that scrapes and verifies business leads using a service. Then it classifies with a large language model, enriches the emails, and saves it to a Google Sheet. Used when the user asks to find leads, scrape businesses, generate prospect lists, or build lead databases for any industry or location. I then have a goal up top, which is to scrape leads using a particular source. I have a bunch of inputs. I even have some scripts that I could use to run these. And then I have a process, and this is my checklist. Start with a test scrape, then do verification, then do a full scrape, then do LLM classification, upload to a Google Sheet, enrich missing emails, and so on and so on and so forth. Okay, so as you see here, big deal. This is a fair amount of time and energy that, I used to take to do these lead scraping things. As part of my work is both for my my dental company and then for LeftClick, for on behalf of my clients. Lead scraping is like a major chunk of what makes a successful cold email campaign. And I just had to do it myself every time. It would take an hour or two. Well, what I can do now is I can just turn all of my own knowledge into a skill. Okay, I can define it in markdown format here, and I can write it with Claude, and then I could just say, scrape me 1K dentists, so 1,000 dentists in, across the United States. Now, when I press this button, what's happening now is it's successfully loading the skill. It's starting with a test scrape of 25 dentists to verify my quality. It already, automatically finds the different filters I want to use and so on and so forth. And then it's going to dump these into a little folder for me. What it'll do after, according to my skill spec, is it's going to read through each of these 25 leads, sometimes do a little bit of background research to say, hey, are these the sorts of leads that I'm actually, Nick is probably actually interested in? And then if so, then it proceeds with a full parallel scrape of 1,000 simultaneously, and that occurs quite quickly. So in this case, it started 4 of these scrapers, and it's just, parallelizing these, so I'm going to get 250 from each. To be clear, previously, this probably would have taken me 15 or 20 minutes to set up the filters, to set everything, kind of configure that initial search right. And then if I wanted to do that search of 25, I would have had to manually verify them myself, which took me another 10 or 15 minutes. After that, I would have started the actual scraper. Then I would have had to upload them into a Google Sheet. I would have had to cross-reference the leads to make sure they're good. I would have had to run some additional AI-based flows. And it just would have been a big pain in my ass, to make a long story short. Now AI is capable of doing this for me in just a couple of minutes. And I'm running this in terminal because I have access to what's called fast mode right now. Essentially, Anthropic's new Opus 4.6 model has launched with the ability to run 2.5 times faster for approximately 3 times the price. So I'm happy to pay a little bit more money if it means that I can do all of the knowledge work that I need to do a little bit faster. As you see here on the right-hand side, it's now finding a bunch of my leads for me. It's compiling them into a list. 250 leads done from that search, 250 leads done from that search, 250 250 leads done from that search, and we just have one more to go. And what's really cool about skills is it doesn't need to be right every single time. It's not like a program. It's not like I put something together and then the second that it makes a mistake, it's done. As you see here, it scraped about 1,000 leads in 87 seconds, and now it's uploading to Google Sheets. And somewhere along the line, there was an issue. And the issue was, it turns out I can't use spaces and stuff like that in the file. So what it did is it realized that it made a problem. Okay. And then it uploaded it to Google Sheets with the proposed solution. It went through and it read through a little bit of like the API documentation and stuff like that to do that. This is stuff that I previously would have had to do, and that try and retry loop just takes forever. On top of that, what it does is it goes and enriches the emails for me. And then what I end up with is I end up with a list that looks something like this. So if I just bold this and then I make this a little bit bigger, I've since hidden the email columns here just because I don't want to, show too much information. We have clinic phone numbers and stuff like that, company phone numbers and addresses. But as you can see here, we have tons of information about dentists that are across the United States. Looks like a big chunk of them are in Philadelphia, New York, Moorestown, Boston. We have cities. We have everything that we need. And so what I'd do with this now is I would take this, then I would send it into a tool like Instantly, which is my cold email platform, and then I would immediately start sending. And as I mentioned, this takes a pre-existing process that would have taken me at least half an hour, probably more. And it turns into one that I literally did in 87 seconds. So as you can see, skills can be extremely economically valuable. The question is, how do you actually go about creating them and creating them in a way that I think is like reproducible and efficient and so on and so forth? Well, the first thing is you need to know how script, or rather skill structure, works. If I just zoom in on this to make it a lot easier, you can see that our scrape leads skill is broken up into a few components. First, we have the folder itself, scrape-leads. Then we have another folder inside called scripts. This runs the program aspect of the skill. And then finally, we have the actual skill.md in Markdown. So I want you to treat what we're seeing here in the skill.md as basically like the orchestrator of this whole affair. So the skill.md is like the checklist or orchestrator. You know, in an orchestra, the orchestrator is the person with the little, I don't know, those sticks. My sister does some of that actually, which is funny. I don't even know what the hell they're called, but it's where you kind of wave them around and do all that stuff. And then what happens is, the orchestrator is not the person making, the conductor, I should say, is not the person that's making the music. What they're doing is they are orchestrating the production of music from a variety of other sources. Inside of scripts, we have, the actual musicians themselves, violinists, the cellists, we have the pianists, and so on and so on and so forth. And so basically what occurs is we give it a big checklist of tasks in the skill.md. We give it a bunch of reference information and everything that it needs. And we treat it just like we treat a junior employee. We say, okay, here's the checklist, go out and do it. And then where the orchestration kind of comes in is if there's an issue with the step-by-step execution of different subtasks, some of which are going to be scripts and stuff like that, then Claude gets to use its own native intelligence to fix it in real time. Not only do they fix it, but then it also goes in and it updates the skill so that if there's another issue in the future, or if another instance of Claude tries running this, it doesn't run into the same problem. So as you can see, they're very, very valuable. They're more or less exactly the same way that like a person would go and do a task. Now, inside of my scripts folder here, I have, as you can see, a bunch of different, actual Python scripts that have been developed for this purpose. Do I know anything that goes on in here? No, I haven't even looked at this code. This is probably the first time that I'm ever opening up this file. What I did is I told Claude that I wanted it to go and, do things in my checklist and then go create scripts that would do them all for me. It's much better to do this than just tell Claude to do it from fresh and from scratch every time, because obviously if it's the same thing that you need to do every time, you should like turn it into like a defined program, right? Because then it's always going to execute similarly. That way, Claude is not actually doing the executions themselves. What it's doing is it's just using the scripts here just like it uses tools. You know how it has access to bash and web search and stuff like that? This is the same idea. It's just we're doing it encapsulated in a skill. Okay, so it takes this information, it goes through the skill. It says, okay, step 1 is test scrape. So I need to run the scrape appify with this query, max items 25, whatever the heck that means. Then it goes, it executes this. Once it's done, it checks the result. If that's the case, then it goes back and then it runs the same scraper except with different parameters. Assuming that that's good, then it uses this classify leads LLM script afterwards to, tabulate that information. Assuming that that's good, it goes into what looks like update sheet to like create a Google Sheet and then send it. Assuming that that's good, it then goes and enriches the missing emails and so on and so forth. And there's different paths here based off of, how many people we want to scrape. I have a few other skills that I use pretty often as well. This one's called literature research. And so, if I'm trying to perform research on a task, I will actually say, go perform a lit review on the recommended daily dose of, let's say, vitamin D